we continue our discussion on the business organization and structure, and in this class, our focus is on basic organizational structural concepts. For the concepts, we have six basic organizational structural concepts, which are separation of ownership and management, and then is separation of direction and management, span of control and scalar train, tall and flat organizations, outsourcing and offshoring, and the last item or the last concept is shared services approach. So in this class, our discussion will focus on these six organizational structural concepts. Let's begin with the discussion of separation of ownership and management. For ownership and management, there are two different things. Ownership and management of larger organizations are often separated. So here, our discussion is on larger organizations. What do we mean here is we seldom talk about small organization, or what we discuss in other class is about the entrepreneurial structure. So our discussion is on larger organizations. So the ownership and management of the larger organizations are often separated. This is especially common in larger companies where the owners, or what we call shareholders, elect directors to run the company on their behalf. So for some companies listed on the stock exchange, they have the shareholders, but they are not the people to run the business by themselves. They elect directors to run the company on their behalf. And in order to ensure that directors are running the business in the best interest of the owners, many safeguards and controls are put in place. And here we talk about the internal controls, and the internal controls will also be discussed in our course, but not in this class. So you can see directors are responsible for management or managing the company, and the owners or the shareholders, they are owning the company. So they have the ownership of the company, but they don't run the company by itself. And the next concept is separation of direction and management. In larger organizations, even the direction and management may also be separated. For directors, they may lack of the time to deal with everyday issue and arises in the day-to-day running of the organization. So they will therefore appoint managers to undertake this task for them. So you may have a question, what do directors do if they don't need to run the business on a daily basis? And it leaves the directors, because they are free on a day-to-day issue, so they can focus on creating and managing the high-level strategies for the organizations, while the managers, the directors appoint the manager, and the managers focus on the day-to-day operational issues. So from our discussion on the first two structural concepts, we have the separation of ownership and management, and also we have the separation of direction and management. So here, first, we have the owner or shareholders. As we mentioned, we have the owners, and then we have the directors, because the owners or shareholders, they appoint the directors. And last here, we have the managers. We have the manager here. So we have three layers in which owners, directors, and managers. from the first two concepts that we explained, because the ownership and management can be separated and the direction and management can also be separated. So here we can see the owners. There's a group of owners, what we call shareholders. They own the company, but they don't involve in the daily operation or even for the direction of the company. And then for directors, some larger organizations, the directors, they don't run the company on a day-to-day basis. They set the strategy or they create the strategy on a high level. And for managers, which are appointed by the directors, and managers are responsible for daily operational issues. So here you can see there are 3 layers in a big or in a larger organizations. And the third organizational structure concept is on span of control and scalar chain. For span of control, it is about the number of people. It's the number of people for whom they are directly responsible. In other words, there are how many staff are under a manager. So here is about their span of control. The factors that influence the span of control include 3 things. First, the nature of the work. The more repetitive or simple the work, say it's quite repetitive and quite simple, it means that the wider the span of control can be. So it's a check. Wider span of control. And the type of personnel. If the more skilled and motivated the managers and other staff members are, the wider the span of control can be. So here, if we have the skilled and motivated managers and other staff as well, we have wider the span of control. On the other hand, if there's non-skilled and unmotivated manager, then the span of control will not be so wide. And the last factor influence the span of control here is the location of personnel. If personnel are all located locally, that is, all you can reach to them without a lot of effort, and you don't need to use a lot of effort to supervise them, it allows the span of control to become wider. Imagine if you have a lot of personnel located overseas, the span of control will be very limited. So here, span of control is about the number of people for whom they are directly reported to a manager. And another concept here is the opposite of span of control, is scalar chain. Scalar chain is the line of authority which can be traced up or down the chain of command, from the most senior member of staff to the most junior. It therefore relates to the number of levels of management within an organization. So it's quite simple from a definition. Scalar chain is about how many layers of the management in an organization. If there's many layers, it means the scalar chain is long. On the other hand, if it's just 2 layers, the directors and the staff, then the scalar chain is short. And next structure concept is tall and flat organizations. A tall organization has many levels of management and a narrow span of control. That's why I talk to you, or I explain to you, the span of control is sometimes on the opposite of scalar chain. If a scalar chain is long, then the span of control may be narrow, because the people directly responsible by a manager is just a few. Due to their long scalar chain, there's a long layer. Such in this diagram. there are many managerial levels, or very high on the hierarchy of an organization is quite complicated, and you have different layers, one layers, second layers, third layers. So the scalar chain here is long, but for span of control of each manager is not wide. So here, say here is Director A. He has two managers who are B and C under him. But the scalar chain is long because even under B and C, they have another reporting line or subordinates reported to him. After the tall organizations, we talk a bit on the flat organization. Flat organization has few levels of management, so you can imagine the scalar chain is relatively short, and it has a wide span of control. And for span of control, it means the number of people for a manager to be responsible for. And here is the sample chart of wide span of control under these flat organizations. There's only two layers here, 1, 2, but for each manager, I just circle here. The managers have more subordinates reporting to them. So for span of control is wide, but for the scalar chain here is a bit short. And it is worth noting that for tall organizations, it tends to be more structural, but more bureaucratic, and take a longer time to make decisions because large number of levels of management that need to be involved. For flat organizations, it tends to have weaker control and fewer chances for employees to progress or be promoted within the organization. Imagine, because the manager here, for the flat organization, the manager here has more people following them, so they have more power in influencing the division that they are in charge. So from the management perspective, the control will become weaker than the tall organization. And here we talk another structural concepts, outsourcing and offshoring. Outsourcing means contracting out aspects of the work of the organization, previously done in-house, to specialists provide. In other words, outsourcing is looking for better service quality. It's not just about cost savings. Cost saving may be one of them, but service quality is also a concern because outsourced to a third party who is an expert in a particular area, say IT, then it helps the company to grow as well. For offshoring, it refers to the process of outsourcing or relocating some of an organization's functions from one country to another. In other words, it is a practice relocating the services from home country to foreign country, say for example, and it usually in an effort to reduce cost. So the purpose of offshoring is to reduce cost. While the cost savings can be significant, offshoring can create additional problems for the organization, including problems with cultural differences and language barriers. So for offshoring, it's not a good choice in case the cost reduction is not significant to compensate the problems created, like cultural differences and language barriers. And many companies in the United Kingdom have moved their customer call centers to other countries in the last few decades, such as India, the Philippines. These countries have significantly lower wage rates than United Kingdom, making the call centers cheaper for the offshoring company to operate. While the cost savings can be significant, as I said, this migration of the call center from United Kingdom to India or Philippines, it creates another challenges like language barriers or cultural differences as well. So it's not perfect, but if the manager think cost savings is much more important than others, so they may choose to sacrifice the customer satisfaction by reducing cost more drastic. The last organizational structural concepts that I would like to share with you is shared service approach. This approach involves restructuring the provision of certain services within the organization so that instead of service being found in several different parts of the organization, it is centralized into one specific part of the organization. So imagine there may be 5 divisions in a company, and in each division it has its own accountant. And the organization thinks that it's much more efficient to put all 5 accountants into a central office to provide a shared service to all these 5 divisions. So finally, 5 accountants may be too much or too many for them, so maybe just have 3 accountants is enough, so they can provide the same service level to all 5 divisions with only 3 accountants. Here is about the shared services approach. The shared services approach is more than simply centralizing the function into one place. Shared services often involves running the service, for example IT, like a separate business within the organization, and charging the rest of the organization for the use of the services. The example here explains that the shared services function or the shared services approach is try to build a shared service center to provide a service which is the same or the similar service quality as an outsourced party. So the aim is to build the service quality, not to destroy or damage the service quality, because they think the shared service center is a profit center. It charges to the rest of the organization for the use of the service. It means that the division can choose either the in-house shared services provided, say IT, or outsource to the third party if the division has the power to do that. It helps to improve the service quality because the in-house shared service function, they need to compete with the outsourced service provider because they are still charging the rest of the organization for the use of the service. But in general, it's not talking about just cost saving. It's talking about the balance between the cost and also the service quality under this shared service approach. As mentioned, this approach has several advantages, including first, improve the quality of service provision. So as I mentioned, the service quality is one of the key concerns in this approach. And second is improved consistency of service. There's no disruption of service, or the standard of service across the organization is the same or very consistent delivered. And the third advantage here is cost savings. Cost savings because, as I mentioned in the case of accountants for 5 divisions, it creates a greater efficiency by grouping all together into one place and manage the accountants by the supervisor. So in other words, it can save some cost. Initially maybe 5 accountants, and each one of them located in one of the divisions, but now pull them together and we only need 3 accountants, and the other 2 may be moved to other location, to other role. So it helps to reduce the cost of by providing the same services to the internal stakeholders. We talk more about the shared service organizations here, and imagine the shared service organization is a medium through which defined services can be provided across the organization by a dedicated unit. And it differs from outsourcing in that the shared service provider is actually a part of the organization. So they are the same company or under the same team, but just a restructure of the organization to put the same talent into one place. An example of a very effective use of shared services concept is the provision of professional training courses and support across large consultancy firms operating on a regional or multinational basis. So here, the advantage of shared services approach are stated here. For example, the training class is provided by field experts in a central hub, and the teachers or the trainers, they have to go through they have to go to different departments in the companies to provide their training services to them. And it's very, very effective under this shared service organization structure, because for the trainers, they are centralized and they can update by themselves with the pool resources, and they provide the services or the training services to all parties needed in the company in different locations. Otherwise, they have to stay in different locations. Maybe they need to hire more trainers to serve the same purpose. But it's not perfect for shared service. If the business units are very diverse, this centralized model may not be appropriate. And to bear in mind that the potential cost reductions sometimes is overestimated, as many organizations will still rely on local provisions to meet the local needs of each business function. Say here, the trainers, if they deliver the same standard courses across the organization, then it's fine. But if the business units are diverse and the requirements of training are different from division 1 and another division, then it's not wise to set up a centralized training team, because the cost will be much higher than they expected. And also, if the training should be delivered in local language or to comply with local law, then a centralized training team is not appropriate to serve all business units in the world, because there are different compliance standards, and they have the local lawyer or the local legal service training team in order to serve the local business units. So it depends whether the services delivered can be standardized. If not, then shared service organizations is not the perfect solution to a company. So now is in-class question time. In a small company, there is usually a divorce of ownership and control. Is this statement true or is false? Remember, we have 6 basic organizational structural concepts. When we discuss this concept, we talk about larger organization. So you can imagine whether the divorce of ownership and control is applicable to small company or not. The second question here, there are 2 statements. So which one is correct, or all of them are correct, or none of them are correct? The first statement, the scalar chain relates to the number of people over whom our manager has authority. And the second statement is a business with highly skilled, motivated members of staff will tend to have a wider span of control than a business with demotivated employees. And when we discuss on span of control and scalar chain, the scalar chain has the definition is the line of authority which can be traced up or down the chain of command. So whether you can think whether it is related to the number of people over whom a manager has authority. Is it correct? Right? And the second one is about the span of control. And the factors influence span of controls include the nature of the work, whether it's repetitive and simple versus simple. The second is about the type of personnel, whether they are skilled and motivated managers. And the third is about the location of personnel. And here is about the skilled and motivated members. So whether you think with skilled and motivated members will have wider span of control or not.